Well, good afternoon and welcome to day three of the 2021 NASDA Winter Policy Conference. We're so excited that our attendance has exceeded or close to be exceeding 800 people so far. And I think that they're all tuning in for this next series of speakers, a panelist of all stars to discuss a very timely and serious issue facing the United States of America. Over the next hour, we're going to talk about the food production system and food insecurity. The title of this one is called Together at the Table, Feeding All Americans in a Pandemic. We all know that hunger exists in every city, community, and county in America. And before COVID-19 put immense stress on our food system and created incalculable economic harm and caused a lot of Americans to lose their job, hunger was already a very big issue in our country. Although I can't speak on national statistics, I know that in Kentucky, our rates have always exceeded national food insecurity rates, with 1 in 7 Kentuckians not knowing where the next meal may come from, and 1 in 5 Kentucky school children facing the same unfortunate reality. We can do better than that. And at NASDA, we represent farmers and agribusinesses and everyone in the food production system. And a lot of times we get caught up on statistics about yields per acre, efficiencies, and ways to maximize production. Well, today we have a gathering of 4 distinguished speakers who have their own statistics about areas that they've worked in for a very long time about combating hunger. When we look back on the effects of COVID-19, one of them is the major food system disruption that our country went through last spring and how we as a country were able to react to it. One of the things we know that happened is that about a 30% increase was immediately felt in our food banks and food pantries across the United States. And a lot of folks who went to go ask for a little extra help did it for the first time in their life. Another issue that complicates food insecurity in America is the stigma attached to asking for a little help. There was never a lack of food in our country, but there may have been some confusion about how exactly we're going to feed folks. The effort was multifaceted, working with our food pantries, our food banks, our grocery stores, independent producers, and yes, the USDA food box program as well. Over the past fall, many commissioners and state departments of agriculture were surveyed. And if you'd like to learn more about what we did at NASDA, we created a NASDA Food Security Toolbox with recommendations from around the nation about how state departments of agriculture have either created partnerships, changed laws, and changed the culture of giving when it comes to supporting our food banks and food pantries and anti-hunger organizations across all of our states. The findings in this study are worth the reading, so please check it out and see what the progress has already been done, but also it might inspire you in your home state to learn about something that may not be happening yet and create it back home where you're at. Well, today, without further delay, I'm happy to introduce a panelist of 4 very distinguished speakers. We have Lisa Davis, who's Senior Vice President of No Kid Hungry campaign with Share Our Strength. We also have Ann Reed, a friend of mine, Division President with Kroger Company, a major grocery store retailer in America. We have Carrie Calvert, Vice President of Government Relations for Agriculture and Nutrition with Feeding America, an organization that many of us already have strong interactions with. And we also have Sara Hollenbeck, founder of High Five Meats. I'll be moderating today's panel. Our first speaker will be Lisa, and I'll make an introduction to her. Then we'll have a series of questions. We also would encourage you during this time to come up with questions of your own that you can pose to the panelists later today. Lisa Davis serves as Senior Vice President of Share Our Strength's No Kid Hungry campaign. In this capacity, she is responsible for developing and implementing results-driven strategies and local campaigns that leverage partnerships, expertise, advocacy, and communications that increase participation with federal nutrition programs and builds momentum towards ending childhood hunger. She's a native of Montana. She received her JD from the Washington College of Law at American University, Bachelor's of Arts in English, Literature, and French from Concordia College. She lives with her husband, 4 children, a dog, and from what we were told, a very curmudgeonly cat in Maryland. So at this time, we'd like to introduce Lisa Davis, for about 5 minutes of remarks. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Commissioner Quarles, for the generous introduction, for your leadership on the issue of hunger over these last many years, and for putting together today's panel. As you noted, hunger in the United States was a problem before the pandemic hit, but it's also an imminently solvable problem. And as an organization that focuses primarily on child hunger, Share Strength was really excited that before COVID hit, we were seeing child food insecurity rates drop, and indeed at the lowest level since USDA first started tracking them in 1998. Unfortunately, decades of progress was undone literally in a matter of weeks as a result of the dual economic and health crises caused by COVID. And more recent estimates are that as many as 12 to 17 million kids, up to 1 in 4 of the children in our nation, are now facing hunger. The consequences of this hunger that they're facing in this moment of time will have an impact that will last for many years, if not a lifetime. There is a robust body of research that shows that hunger deeply affects a child's physical and mental health, their development, how well they do in school, whether or not they graduate, and even how much they earn over a lifetime. So this is an urgent problem that needs to be addressed, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because our country needs these children to grow up healthy and strong to be tomorrow's workforce and tomorrow's leaders. When people think about hunger and child hunger in the United States, often what comes to mind is that it's an urban or a city problem. Indeed, child hunger in the US is more prevalent in rural communities than it is in metropolitan areas. According to Feeding America's research, 86% of the counties with the highest percentage of kids at risk for hunger are rural. 90% of the countries experiencing long-term poverty have entirely rural populations. And in 2016, 15% of households in rural areas faced hunger, compared to only 11.8% of households in metropolitan areas. The reasons for this won't come as a surprise to any of you. Many rural communities lack well-paying jobs. Transportation can be challenging. Food resources such as supermarkets or food pantries, summer meal sites are more limited, or they might be located miles away. Food costs are often higher, even though a lot of the food that supplies our nation is grown in rural areas. And also in many rural communities, people know their neighbors really well, and there can be a deep stigma and sense of shame connected to admitting that you need help or asking for help, as Commissioner Quarles mentioned. The good news is that in our country, we have really strong federal anti-hunger programs in place that should reach every eligible child and family. SNAP and WIC, school breakfast and lunch, summer and after school meals. The challenge is that even before COVID, those programs didn't always reach the kids who needed them. And over the last year, as all of you have witnessed firsthand, and our food system has been so strained, those barriers have become even greater. I'm really proud of Share Strength's pandemic response. As some of you know, before COVID, our work really focused primarily on helping kids access meals provided by schools. When the COVID crisis hit almost a year ago, schools and community organizations and Share Strength had to pivot on a dime, developing and implementing new meal programs, sometimes over a single weekend. We've been fortunate to be able to grant more than $65 million to nearly 2,000 schools, Boys and Girls Clubs, food banks, and faith-based organizations across all 50 states. Our funding has helped purchase PPE, equipment like carts and vans to deliver meals to kids who can't get to them, and packaging and other costs involved with these new grab and go and pick up meals. We've also worked across the aisle in Washington and in the state houses to build bipartisan support for things like waivers that give schools and organizations flexibility to adapt their programs to safely reach kids and still get reimbursed. We've helped create and expand pandemic EBT, which provides families whose kids normally rely on free or reduced price school meals with additional help to purchase groceries. Our Center for Best Practices has provided technical assistance and best practice guides to thousands of school districts across the nation. Because in the middle of a crisis, there's no time or reason for everyone to have to start from scratch. And we've worked nationwide to help families find meals and assistance through our Meal Finder map and our texting line, which have been used by families nearly 250,000 times since March. And we haven't done this alone. Many of our sister anti-hunger organizations like Feeding America, our corporate partners like Kroger and others have undertaken truly heroic efforts to keep our communities fed. But charitable efforts alone are not enough. Meeting this moment and this crisis requires a coordinated and strategic response across federal and state government, as well as effective public-private partnerships. We know that the hardship that families are feeling right now will last for months, even years. As we begin to transition from relief to rebuilding and recovery, we need to take the lessons we learned from this crisis and apply them to make programs feeding kids stronger and more efficient for the long term. And that is why I'm so excited about NASDA's role in this session. I want to close with one final thought. There is a lot that divides our nation right now and our political leaders, but ending hunger is an issue that should unite all of us. We may not always agree on every policy or every pathway forward, but I know that we all share a belief that no one in this country should go hungry, and we all share a commitment to finding common ground to address this issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And in case you're wondering, they run a Rural Childhood Hunger Summit, and I believe they're going to do another one later this year that's virtual. Thank you for the work that you do. Up next is a producer, Sara Hollenbeck. She is from Montana as well. She started High Five Meats LLC in August of 2015. High Five Meats sells local beef and lamb directly from the Hollenbeck Ranch to consumers in the Billings, Montana market and in the surrounding area. Sara capitalizes on the local food movement, which has benefited during this pandemic, as well as social media, where she shares daily struggles and triumphs of the farm life. You can probably catch her on social media as well. She was featured in the Emmy Award-winning documentary Farm Her, a French television reality show called Montana Wild, and she's also featured in tourism promotions for the state, and she was recently selected as 40 under 40 entrepreneur in Billings, Montana. I would imagine you will echo what we've seen across the United States as a commitment to local agriculture, as many people decided to spend a little bit more time in the kitchen instead of the restaurant this past year. Sara.
Thank you for having me. I will try and keep my spiel short and sweet. Initially, when I started my company, I just was looking for an opportunity for myself to be more involved in the family ranch. That was more than, the labor of lambing and feeding and all of that. And we'd gotten a lot of people asking if they could purchase our meat. And I just thought it was crazy that we weren't taking advantage of feeding our local community. So I got into it about 6-7 years ago now. And every year I'd reevaluate why I was doing it, because it was very difficult starting out to sell direct to consumer. I helped co-found a food co-op in the area, and we had just started in 2019. We were kind of getting the ball rolling, figuring out how it was going to work as a group of like-minded producers trying to sell local food. And then COVID happened. Our sales increased 1,400% within the first month of COVID happening. And we were fortunately strategically placed to be able to fulfill the needs of our local community when the grocery stores were seeing very empty shelves. Thankfully, we were positioned like that, and we saw the need from our local community to be also helping feed those that could not afford to be even grocery shopping at the time, or were even scared to go into grocery stores to try and limit their exposure to other people. We asked our amazing customers at the time if they wanted to donate any monetary donations. We would match that in food from our local producers to be able to give to our local food banks, and that's something that we still do every month. We thought it would just be like a one-time people feeling generous thing, and it's been going on every month. I think last month was even one of our highest months that we've had since the pandemic happened. So we know the need to really strengthen our food systems. That's what we're primarily focused on, but we also know that in doing that, we have to strengthen our local community and support those around us as well. My family also did something crazy during the pandemic, and we bought a small processing plant. We're always looking to more vertically integrate our businesses, and we thought, hey, why not do something else crazy and try the whole processing world? It's been a huge learning experience for us, as we knew how to raise the animal and we knew how to sell the meat, but we didn't know how the middle part happened. And as a lot of people know, that's kind of where the food system snapped when we had the major disruptions, was within the processing field. So the state of Montana actually did a grant funding process through COVID for meat processors, and over 60 businesses got up to $150,000 to increase their whatever they saw needed, that more money to fit and upgrade their facilities. We were fortunate enough to get one of those grants, and it's been a huge opportunity for us. Something I can touch on later, possibly in the Q&A, is what's next for us in that regard. While that was extremely important and has helped, we're now facing a major labor issue, and as well as a lot of the other processing plants in the states, is how to help that situation going forward. Since I've been doing this for a few years, I started getting a lot of other ranchers reaching out to me from across the nation saying, hey, we want to help feed our communities, but we have no idea how to start being able to sell our meat directly. And I was on the phone, I was emailing, I was responding to messages on Instagram constantly, when I finally snapped and I told my husband, I've got to do something to help people who want to be able to sell their meat directly but have no clue how to get into it, whether it's pricing, processing, marketing, shipping. So I held a 5-week webinar course. I tried to keep it relatively affordable for anyone that wanted to do it. And excuse me, I was hoping for like 10 to 20 people, and it's still selling as a pre-recorded webinar to almost over 150 ranchers that have taken a part of that. So the food system, while it broke, I feel like we were trying to mend it and talk about the issues that we had through COVID, and I hope that we will only come out stronger in the end from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And one thing that all the state departments of agriculture are trying to figure out right now is that a silver lining was more emphasis on local agriculture, but we want to make sure that it's not a fad, but we turn it into something that's permanent down the road. And so maybe that's something we can talk about here in a few moments. Our next distinguished speaker is Carrie Calvert. She is the Vice President of Government Relations for Feeding America, the nation's largest anti-hunger organization. Through a network of 200 food banks and 60,000, that's right, 60,000 local agencies, Feeding America feeds over 406 million people a year and leads efforts to reduce hunger in America. Carrie also leads Feeding America's federal legislative work, working with the Farm Bill and federal nutrition programs. She also works to improve federal policies for federal nutrition programs, sustainability, and food donations. I know that here in Kentucky, as well as other states, we simply could not do what we do without close interaction with Feeding America, Feeding Kentucky. Thank you for what you all do. I'd like to introduce Carrie Calvert.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Quarles, for that great introduction. And I hear from our food banks in Kentucky all the time about the amazing work that you guys are doing there and the strong support that your office and the state of Kentucky have given to our food banks. that's helped them grow their farm to food bank program and just been so impactful. And really, we've seen the impact that a strong partnership with state ag departments and other state agencies has had for our food banks this year. I've been at Feeding America for a little while. I was here when I was at Feeding America actually during the 2008 recession, and this is like nothing we have ever experienced. Since COVID-19 started last March, our food banks on average have seen a 55% increase in demand. This is an increase in demand that is holding steady. So, thankfully, the federal government has passed 3 separate bills providing COVID relief. And thank God, because if they hadn't, I would really worry about our ability to meet the demand that we're seeing in communities right now. So with that 55% increase in demand across the country, we've also really had to shift how we do our work. Frequently, if you think of the food banks as maybe a nonprofit Costco, if you will, or a distribution center with community programming, we're providing food to a lot of those food pantries and soup kitchens and after school programs that are in communities. Well, a lot of those needed to shut down at the start of the pandemic due to either being run by a senior citizen volunteer force or other social distancing measures. So food banks have really shifted to doing a lot more no-touch mass distributions. And the pictures of seeing hours and hours of long lines of distributions have been heartbreaking to see. We've had our distribution shift a bit more to more typical distributions, but I think these large numbers of people that we're seeing are our new normal. So as we adjust to this new normal, here's some of the things that we've realized. I mean, we've always known that fighting hunger is a public-private partnership. You really need the strong federal, state, and local government involvement. You need to bring in the support of, the community and, the private sector, and you need active nonprofit groups, whether it's food banks or schools or other organizations to work in concert to get this food out the door. We've estimated that up to 50 million people could be food insecure due to the pandemic and the economic fallout. And certainly, while we could see that estimate, change a little bit, if the economy recovers a little bit faster and the unemployment, rate drops a bit, we know from the 2008 recession that a lot of the people that are impacted by food insecurity, hourly workers, are the last to recover from a recession as well. So, we're committed, and our food banks are committed to being here for the long term to make sure that we're, nourishing families today, but also connecting them with resources to help them get back on their feet tomorrow. We've been so proud of the work that our food banks have done, and their partners at the state level have done too. We've seen numerous food banks partnering with state agencies, whether they're identifying ways CARES Act funding can be used to connect locally grown crops or food that's produced. Maybe the CARES Act funding is being used to process it so it can be donated, or it's helping to pay for the harvesting and the distribution. There are a lot of really strong partnerships that have happened. One of our hopes is that we can work together to raise up the strong solutions that have been innovative and have really worked during COVID-19, and frankly, work with the federal government to find resources to replicate a lot of these solutions. We know that there's a lot of, common sense solutions to make sure that excess food, whether it's in bulk sizing because it's for the, food service sector that's a little slow right now, or farmers that we're selling to restaurants that might be opening and closing, we think there's a way that we can all work together to present the newly confirmed Agriculture Secretary, Tom Vilsack, with some solutions. So thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Carrie. And one thing that we know is that when state departments of agriculture partner with their local food bank, whether it be Feeding America or not, oftentimes it provides an additional market for produce that would otherwise not be harvested or would rot in the field. And so this is a win-win-win for American agriculture. It helps out those who need a little help. It helps out a farmer, and hopefully it creates a long-term consumer that wants to buy local as they recover. Our last speaker today is a friend of mine, Ann Reed. She oversees the Louisville division of the Kroger Company. She is responsible for 116 stores in Kentucky, Southern Indiana, and Southern Illinois that employ more than 19,000 associates. She began her career with Kroger in the Central Division in 1993. And since then, she has served in a number of leadership positions throughout the company, eventually working her way up to her current position in 2017. Kroger has been a longtime partner of ours to not only combat hunger, but to put locally produced foods into the hands of consumers. We're very appreciative of that. And Kroger, like other grocery store chains, have been very generous with donations, especially to food banks as well. And recently they rolled out an effort for zero waste throughout their stores as well. And a personal thank you to our grocery store associates, especially in the early days. They put the mask on and they made sure that people were fed. Without further ado, Ann Reed.
Thank you, Commissioner Corral. So thank you so much for having me today. Really nice to meet all of our panelists virtually, and just really proud to be a part of this today. You know, at Kroger, our purpose is to feed the human spirit, and we live this each and every day in big and small ways. As one of the country's largest grocery retailers, we employ over 500,000 wonderful associates and operate stores all over the country. Throughout the pandemic, our number one goal has been to provide a safe environment for our associates and our customers while keeping our stores open, providing contactless shopping options, whether that's pickup, delivery, or ship to home, and all while trying to efficiently operate a supply chain so that our communities can have access to fresh, affordable food and all their essentials. It has been a battle to keep our stores open, staffed, and full of product to meet the needs of our communities. Since March, we have invested over $1.3 billion to both reward our associates, keep them safe, and work very hard to keep our customers safe each and every day as they come through our doors. The pandemic has opened our eyes to the current gaps in our food system. Kroger is one of the country's top purchasers of local product, and we continue to grow and diversify our suppliers to ensure strength and stability in our supply chain. Our teams are committed to local farmers and local producers and know that is absolutely imperative to all of our success. As Ryan mentioned, we have been very focused on our Zero Hunger, Zero Waste plan. And that is really to address the food absurdity that 35% of the food in America goes to waste. And we have been working very, very hard and will continue to work hard to end the food that goes into our landfills by 2025. On a local standpoint, I couldn't be more proud of the work that we do with our local food banks. Dare to Care, God's Pantry, Nourish Lexington are some of our amazing partners. And we have been very nimble and innovative to think about how do we end hunger in the communities we serve. We have a mobile market that is a single aisle grocery store on wheels that goes into food desert areas in the Louisville communities. And I do think it's one of the few in the country. And, you know, for me as a retailer, it's important that we continue to really push the boundaries between the profit and non-for-profit sectors so that we can really come together to find those innovative solutions to end hunger. I also really want to thank Commissioner Quarles and the state of Kentucky for the work that we do with our Kentucky Proud products, and could not be more pleased of the work that we do with Kentucky Cattlemen's, Marksberry Farms. We also do a Kentucky Cheese Cares project that 50 cents of every package of cheese sold goes back to feeding Kentucky, and really working with local dairy farmers when they had excess milk to think about how could we work to bring a product to the grocery shelf to really sell and make a difference for our communities. So I think, Lisa, you were the one that said it is going to take all of us working together to make a difference. And I care very passionately about our customers and our communities, and know that it's events like this that will make a difference, because it is going to take all of us having a seat at the table to end hunger in the communities we serve. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, Anne. And in case you're wondering, Kroger's done a great job at addressing those food deserts. I have been on this mobile grocery store. It's literally a grocery store on wheels. And so it's a neat concept. I think it's proving itself, and maybe something that can be scaled up nationwide. Thank you for providing expertise in 4 different areas as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, in the course of history, whether that's an economic collapse, a natural disaster, et cetera, famine and hunger oftentimes follows and complicates things. But here in America, we did a pretty good job, and it reflects the resiliency in the food production system and the resiliency of American agriculture, because I think things could have been a lot worse in 2020 if it had not been for the ability for our producers, our retailers and processors to figure out solutions quickly and keep our nation fed. But let me ask you this, from your perch and perspective, how do you feel our food system is currently functioning, especially as we reflect on 2020? Feel free to
Well,
jump
from
in.
from Feeding America's perspective, one of the things, and Anne, I'm so glad that you're on, because one of the things that has really been our rock this year has been our donations from our retail partners and our food manufacturing partners. They have not missed a beat. The type of product, like we might get more stuff from distribution centers or something, but so the type of food that's available might change, but those donations have carried us this year. And it's been so important to us. USDA foods have also really carried us this year. Dr. Quarles, I have to give a shout out to Kevin Peach on your team, who works so closely with the food banks to help with any sort of distribution regulations or challenges in distributing USDA food. But some of those additional purchases that USDA was making have ended. So food banks are going to see a 30 to 40% drop in foods from USDA this year. So that's going to be a challenge, but really some of the wins I would call out as the retail and food manufacturing sectors continuing those important donations. And we can get to the what to improve on the Farmers to Families food boxes in a minute, because personally, we think that not involving state ag departments is a loss there, because we think that there's a lot more that program can do to help local producers have a market when they need it and connect that food with food banks and others in need. But USDA was really trying to act very quickly to make sure that food wasn't being plowed under for lack of a market. So the intent was positive. We're hoping for some improvements on the execution of it moving forward.
I would just add that when we think about our food system, we often lose sight of our schools and the important role that they play feeding kids all of the time, but particularly in a pandemic. And as we look at kind of the new models that have been stood up, the costs are a lot higher while the reimbursements have stayed the same and not increased. And as we think about, fortunately, moving out of kind of intense COVID crisis mode into recovery, we recognize that a lot of the families that are experiencing hunger are still going to be suffering. And so I think we have an opportunity to look at phase 2. We've got a lot of the pieces of our food supply chain up and functioning again. we have opportunities to take the lessons learned to make them all stronger, but we really need to make sure that we have the pieces in place so that our schools, our food banks, our grocery stores, all of the avenues from which people get food are really optimized, whether it's continuing to add new retailers to the SNAP online purchasing program, making sure our schools continue to have flexibilities as they transition, into more hybrid models, making sure our food banks have enough food, all of those pieces. But I think we're in better shape than we were at the beginning. There's a lot that we need to do to make sure that we're meeting the needs in the moments of the next several months.
So I just want to add, we saw a tremendous amount of generosity from our customers when we think about our Zero Hunger, Zero Waste donations. We do food bags and folks can donate $1, $5, or $10. And we have been consistent all year with really making sure that we've got those products available for our customers to donate. And, I just think in a time of crisis, our customers are so generous. When you think about food donations, we have donated as a Kroger company over 100 million pounds of product this past year. And that is really due to our food rescue program, which we started just a couple of years ago, where we take healthy food, it just might not be sellable, and it can be converted into donations to our food banks. And so that's something we work really hard to make sure all of our associates understand what can be donated to the food banks. The other piece that we added also a couple years ago is products that cannot be consumed go back into animal feed. And for me, that's just such a big part of continuing with that local agriculture and really that cycle of life where we can grow and keep it local and then process it and sell it in our state. So those are a couple areas that I know we've leaned into very much this year. The other piece that we did was, as schools were not open, there was an influx of milk, and we did a lot of large dairy donations to help keep that product and inventory moving. And so for me, it's just so important that our local farmers are really asking when they need some help so that the retailers can really step in and provide that support we need. I know we had some divisions that actually utilized some of our trucks to actually get the milk and then donate it to the areas that needed it. So for me, it's about how do we continue to work together to be nimble and find some solutions to really help feed our country.
One thing we've learned that if you can't donate food or donate resources, you can oftentimes donate your time to an organization. Sara, a question specific to you. We saw for a short period of time, but the backlog continues to be felt today, a bottleneck with our meat processors, and you were able to capitalize on that as a local producer. Do you see this something that's going to only continue to grow as we emerge from the pandemic, in your perspective?
Oh, this is such a big topic, as a lot of people know. The problem was even though we purchased a little processing facility, the bottleneck was so deep that we still couldn't even process our own animals because the backlog was, I think they were booking into 2022 at the time that we purchased it. And with the big packers, I mean, they had 1 million head or more backed up between the pork, the beef, all of it. That was a terrible situation, but I'm always of the mindset of, okay, what do we do so that doesn't happen again? Unfortunately, it happens in the lamb industry more than it's talked about because lamb is not the most popular protein. But a number of years ago, the supply for lamb was so high that the prices fell so low that the processors couldn't even process them anymore, and it was a disaster situation. So on a much larger scale, that happened again with the pandemic. There's a lot of talk and discussion on what we can do to regulate the big packers. And while those discussions, of course, need to be happening, what I like to focus on is what can we do at a state level or regional level or local level to help the local processors become stronger in their local food systems. And that, I think, needs to be a bigger highlight and discussion than what do the big guys need to change or do so that it doesn't hurt us anymore. And we have to become more reliant on ourselves and getting our product to market, because when we rely on someone that doesn't even know who we are or doesn't even necessarily care about us, that's gonna always be a problem. So I'm much more focused on the grassroots level of what we can do. And fortunately, there's been a big shift to that, and trying to get more local processors the resources, the financial stability, the grants that they need in order to increase their production. And I think that that's a great start to fixing some of our food supply chain issues.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to open it up to attendees, and your questions will be facilitated through Amanda. This one has to do with rules that gained exemptions this past year. So maybe Lisa and Carrie, there's a lot of federal programs, whether it's in the school system or nutrition programs, that got exemptions in 2020. I can think of one that was really big in my state, was an exemption of the congregate feeding rule, which obviously you can't have mass gatherings while you're feeding kids. Do you see any of these exemptions becoming permanent policy changes? And which ones would you choose to change if given the chance?
It's a great question. And first, I want to thank you for your leadership in making sure that those waivers were first in place and then continued as the crisis exceeded kind of the date that we thought it would end. I think one of the bright and shining stars of this has been that those flexibilities, namely getting rid of the requirement that kids come to a site and eat their meal on site, shows a lot of promise to cracking the summer meal gap. It is tragic that only about 15 of every 100 kids that eat free and reduced price meals during the school year are able to access meals during the summer. And that's in a good year. And the reason for that is that kids have to continue to go to a site every single day and eat their meal there. That works beautifully for school breakfast and school lunch when you have a whole infrastructure in place. But that infrastructure goes away when the final school bell rings in May or June. And so what recently released USDA data shows is that July 2020 summer meals, when compared with July 2019, were up 160%. So we served almost twice as many meals to kids during the summer during a global health and economic pandemic than we do in a normal year. So one, I think that reinforces how very badly change is needed, particularly to help reach kids in rural areas during the summer months. But it also shows that some of the policies that we know are most effective are the same policies that communities have relied on during this COVID crisis. In addition to flexibilities to help communities tailor programs to their needs, pandemic EBT, which was modeled after a small pilot program, summer EBT, also shows that in areas where kids can't get to a site, giving families the value of those meals so that they can purchase food at retailers to replace those meals is incredibly effective at reducing food insecurity and increasing kids' consumption of healthy foods. And so I think those are two policies that we need to continue through the pandemic, but we also need to implement permanently so that we can finally end that summer meal gap.
Yeah, that's a great call out, Lisa. And I mean, Feeding America and Share Our Strength, No Kid Hungry work so closely on a lot of child nutrition issues. And I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, what a silver lining that these two policy changes and programmatic changes have had such a significant impact in getting meals to kids in need during this pandemic. I mean, but I also want to, pandemic EBT is an amazing intervention, and I think as a solution to the summer hunger gap, where only 17% of eligible kids are participating in the summer meal program, pandemic EBT, summer EBT nationwide would be an amazing thing and would go so far to address child food insecurity across this country. But, pandemic EBT is an alternate way to deliver school meals, as are the other child nutrition waivers, but it's not new resources into the community. It's just ensuring that kids that are eligible for free or reduced price lunch are actually getting it during this pandemic, and some waivers to expand eligibility, recognizing the heightened need. There's some other flexibilities or additional resources that have played a significant role. The SNAP emergency allotments, again, a powerful tool to get more resources into the community. A lot of the waivers around SNAP recertification. We hear a lot that we need to adjust to a new normal, right? Wearing masks, distancing, so that we can safely, conduct the necessary parts of just day-to-day living that need to happen, whether it's going to the grocery store, or my kids get to return to hybrid school next week, and I'm really excited about that, things like that. But, we need to also think about what needs to be a new normal in terms of flexibility or policies for federal nutrition programs. Let's not be afraid to take the learnings from this and, educate our members of Congress and the administration about what's worked. Ensuring that the SNAP online purchase pilots expand nationwide and that infrastructure is there so people can safely purchase food as SNAP participants through online forms. That is really, really important as well. So I think that there's a lot of positive learnings we can take from this and work to implement as permanent flexibility. I can remember scouring the USDA disaster manual last spring because, we may have a national disaster declared, but it's not really written for a pandemic. There was a little bit of guidance from bird and swine flu, but not much. So we've all had to learn. And I think we have an opportunity to try to make sure that the flexibilities that have worked are enshrined in public policy for the next time, or for safely seeing us through the current pandemic that we're in.
That's great. And please know that NASDA wants to be a partner when we have these conversations about any potential policy changes in Washington, D.C. I know one thing that we did here was that we got a sponsor to buy up some old school buses, retrofit them. Buses that used to pick up and drop off kids were then converted to summer feeding sites that you could drive around the rural parts of Kentucky. And this time I'd like to hand the floor over to Amanda to see if we have any questions from the public, but please take time to check out the NASDA Food Security Toolkit, where you can explore many different solutions to a common problem. Question 1 is for Sara. You're able to see the question. Have you increased pandemic era co-option amongst fellow food entrepreneurs like yourself?
I love that question. The co-op really came to fruition with, I was going to like some local food group meetings, and I just kept thinking like, God, I can't keep pounding the pavement by myself to get this local food movement more pronounced in this area. I'm originally from California, and you would go to a restaurant and local food, it would tell you where the butter was coming from. And then you go to rural Montana and no one cares, or no one knows where anything was coming from. So it was not only, it was a huge consumer educational situation I was putting myself in, and in addition to just being able to try and sell my meat directly to restaurants or families as well. I ended up meeting a lot of other producers that were selling beef. Primarily, it's a obviously beef heavy state. And we just came to the conclusion that it's better to work together than against one another, because our products are one and the same, is that when someone's saying they're buying their meat from their neighbor, we're all their neighbors. We're all the same to them. So we had to work together in order to get our products out there. And especially if we're trying to get into some schools and institutions, we have to band together in order to have the quantities available to get into institutions. So, you know, there's always a little bit of jealousy if somebody's got a cool new product, but then in the same regard, you're like, well, I get to market my products with their cool new products too. And there's just this constant cycle of ingenuity in products that we can come up with to better sell our products together.
Okay, next question. I hear many people taking issue with question-free access to free food, specifically child feeding programs, such as curbside lunch, pickups, etc. Can someone on the panel share why these are no questions asked programs are important at this moment?
I'm happy to start in on that. One of the things that the data since the pandemic hit has shown is that food insecurity has increased exponentially, with millions of families losing jobs and hours and income and facing hardship, often for the first time. A lot of the families that are impacted don't know how to navigate the programs that are available. And there are other families who may not be exactly income eligible, but between housing costs and other costs, they're barely scraping by and struggling to put food on the table. So it is important to make sure that meals are readily available to families. I think also in a pandemic, you want to limit the amount of time people are spending around each other and the amount of contact that they have. So early on in the pandemic, a number of us worked organizational-wise to make sure that requirements that required families to show an ID, to fill out paperwork, were eliminated, because we didn't want to put the school food nutrition workers and the food bank employees that were providing meals at risk, and we didn't want to put the families that were coming out to get meals at risk as well. One of the most heartbreaking things for me in this pandemic is the stories we hear all the time about families that are really, really struggling. They're struggling to keep their housing, they're struggling to keep their pantries full, they're struggling to put gas in the car so they can look for a job, that either don't realize that there are programs that can help their families that they will qualify for, or who are embarrassed to participate in those programs because they've been proud of always making it by themselves. And it is hard to ask for help. As a result, we see from a lot of the pulse polling that the census is doing that an extraordinarily large number of families with children are reporting that in the last 7 days, they have not had enough food for everybody in the household at all times. And as a mom, that's heartbreaking.
Anyone else?
Yeah, you know, I would agree. I mean, now is not the time to now is the time to try to be as efficient as possible in connecting people with resources. You know, we've seen so much in the news about, you know, like employment, like unemployment systems struggling to keep up with the crush of new claims and things like that. By and large, the federal nutrition programs have been a fairly good example of something working better than expected among a crushing increase in need. So to me, the increased flexibility and waivers are a symbol of what's worked well and what I wish other programs would replicate. You know, when we look back on what economists learned from the 2008 recession, it was that you know, not injecting enough resources into the economy to stabilize families creates more of a burden on the entire economy as it's trying to recover. You know, it's more expensive to try to stabilize a family and put them into housing after they've lost their home than to provide them the resources to stay in that housing. So along that same theme, you know, we also have research showing that the SNAP increase in 2009, 2010, a couple years after that, helps not only lift families out of poverty and reduce food insecurity, but also had a stimulative effect on the economy. State budgets are hurting, tax revenues are down. I think this is the time to realize that these additional flexibilities or increases in resources like the SNAP increase not only help nourish families, but they help stimulate the economy and communities as well. So, it's a win-win in terms of making sure people have the food resources, or at least increased access to food resources that their families need in a time of crisis.
Okay, Amanda, let's try to do a lightning round and get one last question in before we wrap things up. How can we as state departments of agriculture partner with your organization to seek improvements to the Farmers to Families Food Box program? Specifically, are there opportunities to increase opportunities for local producers?
I'm happy to start, but Lisa, I know that, I'm sure all of you might have thoughts on this. I shall not hold back. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. Number one, I really think that USDA needs to not require a combination box. There's a lot of food safety issues inherent in that. I do think that USDA needs, the first couple rounds of the program, there were a lot of strong partnerships between local and statewide producers and produce distributors. We heard of a multitude of them across the country. And I think if USDA did a small business set aside and also a disadvantaged business enterprise set aside, could not only help those small growers and producers, but it's also a way to help ensure that minority farmers are also part of the USDA procurement process. We'd also like to see USDA lean into some of the other food distribution programs they already do such an excellent job with, whether it's the National School Lunch Program, Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations, or the Emergency Food Assistance Program. USDA's Food and Nutrition Service team already works with state agencies to effectively and equitably distribute USDA food nationwide and statewide. We think they should lean into that and partner with state ag departments to, increase the success of the program.
Okay, got a couple minutes left. Anyone else?
So the only piece I would add to that is, and I'm just going to speak from firsthand experience as a volunteer, as you think about fresh products, I can remember passing out product to folks, and it was squash and onions and potatoes, and actually had folks say to me, I don't have cooking equipment, I don't have resources to use this product before it goes to waste. And so I know the piece that I keep churning around is there a way to take that product, cook it, process it, vacuum seal it, so that folks that don't have a lot of cooking equipment can actually use a microwave to have a healthy, nutritious meal. And so we have done some work through our Kroger Foundation and actually gave a grant to Dare to Care to put in a thermoseal line that's been up and running since June to really take those products. And so I constantly think about, sometimes the food is available, but folks don't know how to prepare, or they lack access and cooking equipment. So I just think, as we're thinking about how do we feed children, how do we feed seniors, how do we feed people in America, we really do need to think about making it easy for folks to access food, but also to eat it and get good, healthy nutrition. So those are just a couple things I would just ask us all to think about.
Well, thank you. Our time has unfortunately come to an end. So please help me in saying thank you to Ann, Sara, Lisa, and Carrie. You're all friends of NASDA. Let us know how we can be helpful to you. I had a great question for you, Ann. Please explain why there was a toilet paper shortage in America, but that requires another hour of our time. But I think the takeaway here is that there are solutions for government reform. as we emerge from COVID-19 when it comes to not only getting less Americans who are relying upon programs, but also reinventing opportunities for local agriculture as well and for local producers. And so I hope we continue to have a productive conversation on this, continue to tackle what is an unfortunate reality for far too many Americans, whether you're in a pandemic or not, and that's facing insecurity. And at the end of the day, as a farm kid myself and member of NASDA, we want American farmers to benefit and increase their market if we're going to help feed a hungry nation. So thank you all for your time. I would like to remind our members, we have a policy committee